Greetings to everyone listening. This is the Arkon speaking, creator of Greekspeek.com, and we've reached episode 7 of this podcast that I'm doing with my co-host, The Greek. For those of you who have stuck around for the series, I hope that each episode has helped to build up your insight into the subjects that we're discussing. Thankfully, the feedback has only been positive thus far, so I'm encouraged by that, and I hope that we can finish strong with these next couple of episodes. I don't really have a lot to say for this introduction. As everyone is probably familiar with at this point, Greekspeek.com remains a website with neither political, religious, or commercial affiliations, as it's run by myself as a solo project. So, please enjoy the rest of the show, and thanks again for listening. Hi there, Greek. How have you been keeping since the last time?
Hi there, greetings. Sure, I'm a little hungry, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean.
Okay.
So, I figured that last week's discussion about science serves as a good segue into this week's theme, which is food and diet. We'd already touched on some topics regarding that the last time, like how food is digested and how the body transmutes nutrients. So I thought we'd do a deeper dive into similar subjects, starting with examining the nature of food as something that is beyond just a consumption item, which is what it's been reduced to in the eyes of the public. So food, I think, has sort of gone from something that's grown locally to feed a native population to something whose origins and contents are kind of unknown to most people thanks to the corporations in charge of the food chains. And also because of the level of convenience in the Western world, many people think that it's just something that you eat to not be hungry, rather than a particular kind of fuel for the body. But since we know that that's not the case, I was wondering if perhaps you could pick apart some of those misconceptions as far as food being more than just something you buy at Walmart or Walgreens.
Well, you just made a statement about the corporations being in charge of the food. That's only because they're accommodating the people. If the people didn't want it that way or did not feel that they were being accommodated by them, that condition wouldn't exist. Hence, as you might have been aware of in the past few decades, there've been many quote unquote alternative movements towards quote unquote organic food, local food, different types of diet schemes, and which then eventually the corporations do grab onto, again, to accommodate the masses because of demand. So essentially, if the people feel like they're being accommodated by that situation, I should say, when you say corporation, this corporations aren't really bad. It's just a group of people getting together, forming a legal entity, let's say. It could be done lawfully, but rarely is, for a purpose. And, the corporations have gotten a bad name because not what they are, but what they do. So I just wanted to put that in as a qualifier. Okay, and regarding food, what's interesting is I like to go back to historical references. And if you go back into many historical references, even as a cliche, basically bread was considered food, you see, or just a single staple was generally considered what people considered as food, meaning that it seems historically, I mean, there are many accounts, for example, in many, Roman or Greek or Egyptian or whatever courts, medieval courts, where they had elaborate feasts and varieties and all that. But generally, you'll find that there is a staple base in every society, and it's typically a grain-based product. So, maybe that could pretty much settle the idea of, gluten free and all this ridiculousness stuff about grains being, whatever. I just wanted to throw this in also. When you hear people allergic to gluten, they're not allergic to gluten. They're allergic to a animal grade or poorly modified grade of grain, and of course the gluten will irritate you because that is the most tenacious part. If anyone is familiar with the anatomy of grain, look at what gluten does. Right? It's like the protein, the fiber. Let's say not necessarily the brand fiber, but it could get very tough on the system, especially if it's coming from a lesser grain species of grain, lesser grade of grain. So I just wanted to throw that out as an idea because you'll find many cultures use grains, rice and cereals as their staple. So that should be, maybe one of the points to be considered when we discuss food.
Yeah. And as far as it being something that is not just consumed to not make you hungry, but also something that affects neurological functions and energy levels and overall health. That is something that I don't feel is particularly emphasized to the masses because they just look at it as something to consume. So once you come into that understanding that this is something more than that, what are the sort of considerations that you have to then take when you're looking at what to buy and what to eat?
Well, you mentioned health and food, and let's just say we will focus just on the food aspect, but I would say more than a 50-50 split, one's mental or spiritual or psychological condition could take precedent in many cases over their health rather than the food that they eat. In other words, a really happy, ignorant, blissful person eating junk food might do better health wise than a pretty sad, panicky, paranoid, sounding smart type person that eats health food. I used to tell people, for example, when they look vibrant and whatever, and they had talked about health food, and I said, "You look too healthy to be eating health food," because they're already vibrant, right? So we're going to just focus on perhaps the material aspect, but I would stress that there's more than just the material food. Like there's food for thought or thought for food also, right? The psychological, spiritual, they call it psychosomatic, also aspect of health, which is a very broad subject, but that needs to be considered if the concept of health is brought up. One's mental state, which is again all those things that I mentioned. I would suggest though that ignoring the material aspect in a qualitative way on what the food base is would be a critical mistake, and that's what we're going to pretty much talk about how to pursue in a qualitative, not quantitative way, the best way to source food and what food is. I hope.
Yes, of course. And in keeping with what you just said about quality, I think one of the most reoccurring statements that you've made concerning food is the higher the quality of your food, the higher the quality of your life. Can you elaborate a bit on that? So, how does an improved diet improve your life, and what constitutes an improved diet anyway?
Oh, sure. Well, let's just put it this way. Maybe let's just reverse engineer the concept. What I mean by that is, let's say from a biblical sense or a lot of ancient writs, they almost always indirectly promote vegetarianism. And I say indirectly because very rarely does it state anywhere that you should not eat meat, for example, right? But for example, you'll read many times that a certain spiritual state or state of health or condition in the body is preferred when you don't even touch meat, right? I just wanted to bring that up from a reverse point of view, that it's almost an indirect dictate from ancient times to be vegetarian, let's say. But then again, there's also the aspects of, eating animal flesh or flesh. Like, what's interesting about that is if you were to go to a hardcore Chinese restaurant where, they cater to a Chinese clientele, and you happen to look at a menu that is in English, if it's a real hardcore Chinese restaurant, the English menu will just be a rough translation of the Chinese menu written in Chinese, Mandarin, or Cantonese. And what's interesting is when you look at meat selections, especially from hoofed animals, it'll state organ or muscle meat, right? And most Westerners, when they go out and buy quote unquote a steak, well, that is the muscle meat of the animal, not the organ meat. The organ would be the intestines, let's say the stomach, the tripe, or the liver or kidneys. And the muscles would be your sirloin and your fillets and your chucks and your roasts, right? And the reason I bring this up is because it is shocking, for example, to go to a hardcore Chinese restaurant, and when you're looking at beef selections, it'll say beef muscle, and most Westerners will say, "What is beef muscle?" I'm like, "It's steak, dummy." 'Cause they're not used to referring it as such because what they have there is a qualitative breakdown. For example, in the kingdom, in the animal kingdom, I don't want to drift off too much, but I want to come back. The when a predator eats a prey animal, and the prey animal is is a ruminator, in other words, chews the cud. When they eat the animal, they go after the organs, and they actually go after the rumen, or that second stomach that the animal ruminates on, which is vegetative matter that it stores in one part of its body, right, to bring up and chew on later. And it's interesting how a predator will eat a prey animal and go for the rumen, or the vegetative matter that's partially digested in the animal as the primary aspect. If anyone studies predators, a bear, a cougar, or a lion will go. The most delicacy part of the prey is the rumen, where the vegetable matter is. So it's kind of an interesting topic to look at. Not that we as humans do that, but it's interesting to see where the vitality is always in the vegetative matter. You see. Uh, and also there's more vitality in the organ meat than there is in the muscle meat, where the adrenalines and things like that are stored. So that is qualitative to a certain degree, but in our discussion, I think maybe leaning towards the quality when we discuss, well, let's just say in Greekspeek, when I like to discuss quality, one of the first things I bring up is eating seasonally. And what do you think? Should we perhaps traverse that topic a little bit?
Absolutely, we will do that. I'll save it a little more for later because I think that we can still dig into a few things here. One of the things that I'm sort of still wanting to hear about is when we talk about pursue a healthful diet. Like we have what the mainstream says that is as far as things like food pyramids and balanced diets and blah blah blah. What in your experience has been, the best definition of that?
Um, the mainstream? You mean the terrorists? Anyway,
There are many names.
that's what I call them. They're actually they are the terrorists. It's always backwards. It's just a small adjunct to this discussion. Like in America, the 9/11, they brought the terrorism to forward to the people's minds, and they must have won because they said the terrorists hated the freedoms of the Americans. Well, obviously all the freedoms were taken away after, so the terrorists are winning. You get it? The food terrorists are the medical community and all that. There's several levels to that. They tell you, well, red meat is, well, first it was charbroiled meat is bad, then red meat is bad, and then I don't know, sugar is bad, and then now it's wheat is bad, and it's just terrorism. You have to keep the population ignorant and in fear. I think stupid and fearful. Um, but on the other hand, the mainstream, especially many of the regulatory and government agencies, they are not approaching, let's say, nutritional information and mainstream information that people get from a health point of view. They're doing it from a what would you call property management? See, they view people as livestock because legally you're registered as livestock. It's called human resources or human services, livestock. Can people be livestock? Of course, because they're alive and they're in stock. And just like anyone managing livestock, you want to predict if, let's say, you're operating a ranch with 300 million bits of livestock on there. You have to estimate how you're going to feed them and what certain feed parameters you should have to have a consistency, with the livestock, and that's all the mainstream is. But unfortunately, you're in the age of terror, so you're going to be terrorized about it. I think that there is no, let me just say this again with a capital O, there is no valid information regarding food in the mainstream. There is a lot of information, but there is no valid information. Give you an example, they are still basing nutritional information with a caloric count. If anyone doesn't know how they do caloric count, they take like something looks like a test tube, they put a bit of food in there, and they pump oxygen in there, gas, pure gas, as pure as they can get it. Then they have something akin to a spark plug, and they seal the mechanism or the capsule, and they ignite the oxygen, and then within a flash of a moment, the oxygen burns everything to a crisp, and they measure the heat given off, and that's the caloric intake. So I don't think the intestines work that way. And also, if you were pooping charcoal, then you could say that you've absorbed all the calories, as they say, right? But that's not the case either. So there's nothing valid in any science, university or government or social stuff, media that's regarding food. And I don't want to be a part of a loyal resistance, because the moment you just start talking about how something or an organization or group or social aspect is not good, you become this resistance, and they like that because in order, an opposition, most entities or groups like to have an opposition, it makes them stronger in a way. But so I don't want to be their opposition, but without opposing them, bring up how ridiculous on their face the information that is brought out. Another one is cholesterol. That's high in cholesterol. That is a misnomer. Cholesterol is something that's created in the body. There's nothing you can eat with cholesterol in it unless you're anyway. The amount of stupidity, it's just sheer stupidity that is out in the world regarding food is unfathomable. So it needs to be discarded in order to have sensibility. So regarding nutrition, on what you should do, if you want to really know, like I said, eating seasonally and indirectly promoting vegetarianism, seeking out traditions, what you found being eaten through culture. I'm talking about the cross latitude aspect of, you have Asian and Western cultures, northern and southern cultures. If you look at many of their traditions, that would be the most advisable way to go. And also, by the way, I like to say amateurs give advice and pros give diagnoses, right? So when I say advisable, it's kind of like it doesn't really get people very far because you have to diagnose your condition, which means look at it across, right, in a good way, and figure out what's really going on.
I mean, a lot of those points we'll develop them as we go on, but I thought it was interesting that you talk about how the establishment is clueless and how the masses need to be accommodated, because that ties back to cosmic censorship. So given that that censorship has to be an all-encompassing condition, it makes me wonder, in what way does the food have to be manipulated or altered to cater to that world where people are blind to what's important? Is it a matter of putting something into the plants or the animals that the food is derived from, or altering the traditions of how food is cooked in the home, or making certain foods favorable over other ones, etc.?
Yeah, indirectly promoting non-meat or vegetarian would be the indirect best way to say, vegetation as a based diet is best, and putting things in all that in food, that would be the spraying and storage, and transport, yeah, and then there's the deliberate, cynicism that one might tend to hear if I say that the people that rule you have certain beliefs. Whether you believe them or not doesn't matter. I'm stating as a fact, and for sure, the people that rule the world take control of governments, food supplies, water supplies, and the military. Right? For example, if you look at the symbol of the United Nations, that is not a map of the world with any kind of geodesic lines, and that is not an olive branch going around it. Anyone does research on what an olive branch looks like, will see that is not the United Nations symbol. What the United Nations symbol is wheat going around what looks like a map of the world in the crosshairs of a rifle. Right? It's very cynical, but no one sees it because you're not supposed to see it, right? You're only supposed to see what you're supposed to. So again, the people that rule you control the food industry. So, for example, if you look at the darkest, deepest conspiracies on the internet, you'll find that there's good enough evidence that a lot of quote unquote what they call, from a generic sense, satanic powers. If you look at their dossier, they actually own food corporations, real big ones, right? Like Satanists, right? and of course, control the governments and all that. Like, most people don't know that all of their government leaders have to do a ritual where they crawl on their stomach and in front of a group, a religious group, and there's a bowl of feces, a bowl of blood, and a bowl of urine that they have to partake in. Yes, your leaders do that. So without getting down that dark road, um, these are the people that are running the food. Also, distribution. What they do to it is what they can do to it regarding bioengineering and all that is all mythology. What happens is they just revive strains of food that have certain characteristics. And an example of that would be, if anyone's been in a large office building in a major city, you walk into some of these lobbies and they're magnificent indoor lobbies, and you'll see like citrus trees, right? Well, those are what's called decorative citrus trees. And one day I just grabbed what looked like an orange and plucked it, and I tried to open it and eat it, and it was all pith. There was nothing resembling an orange fruit inside. It was like a solid starchy mass. So it was a decorative variety of citrus tree that has no nutrition really, and other than fiber. So there are decorative strains or strands or genes of plants that are inedible. Then there's like what's called animal grade or not for human consumption. Like a lot of soybeans, there's an animal strain that they grow for feeding animals. And there's like if you go to China or Asia or Korea, they have many varieties of soybeans, and you'll see. I've seen someone who was distributing soybeans once and said those look really large. Yeah, that's the animal soybean that are grown for animals, not for humans, because it doesn't have a lot of nutrition for, let's say, being a high quality soybean. So the example I'm giving here is, for example, take the consistency of the grains that are being produced for most consumption throughout the world, in most parts, especially the Americas, is there because of the environmentalism, they're seeking out grains that grow fast and require less irrigation or less water, right? Because economically, from an agriculture economy, if it needs less water, it's cheaper, and if it grows faster, you don't have to wait as long time as money for them. So they're putting out, actually sowing and reaping this type of grain versus one that required more hydration, more irrigation, and took longer to grow, you see. And the one that required more irrigation and took longer to grow is more healthful and beneficial for people to eat than the one that doesn't. And also there are plants that are naturally insect repellent. Insects won't eat them, as much, and things like that. So the variety goes on and on and on. If you look at the majority of the vegetables that you see, that is like an example is iceberg lettuce. That is a hybridization. Plants can be hybridized. Give another example. People, there's an old cliche that says, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, I'll tell you, as you ask that question, the chicken farmer did. Because what you call a chicken today is the product of crossbreeding by chicken farmers for the past 500 years. Because if you had seen a chicken from more than 500 years ago, you would not recognize it as such. It would be very thin and tall and lanky. And you might recognize it as a chicken, but nothing like you would consider seeing today. Do you see my point? So there's a tremendous amount of manipulation, natural manipulation, hybridization that man has been doing to ultimately end up with the food sources that you see today.
Mm. And I mean, there are a few corporations that are sort of in the most front-facing public light for that sort of thing, and maybe we'll touch on a few of them later. But now I want to look at the connection between food and health and what the interrelationship is there. Because you once said something interesting on a different live stream about food. I think you said some people say olive oil is healthy, but actually that's inaccurate. Food is neither healthful nor unhealthful. It's rather the body that's either healthy or not, and those two things aren't the same. So even though I know
Right.
you said, a healthy kind of grain just a few minutes ago, maybe you were saying that lightly, because I want you to develop this point a bit. Some would say it doesn't reconcile very well with the fact that some foods are said to be toxic in and of themselves, or at least have a toxifying effect on the body, and so on.
Well, there's food combining. For many people, for example, If nothing is really healthy in itself, it's healthful. I like to use that term more. If I sometimes also like healthy, but healthful, meaning it promotes that versus the opposite, which would be difficult for the body to recognize as nutrition, for example. But there is something called food combining, and when very often there might be a semi-toxic substance found in what's considered a fruit or a vegetable, and they'll promote that as being toxic because of that, without sensing the combination of the rest of the things around it. Like food combining, for example, for many people, if you eat melon and dairy or melon and citrus, it becomes toxic in the gut, right? If you want to make someone sick, play a joke on them, have them eat a good amount of watermelon and then drink a pint of milk. That will create a toxic effect in the body. I used to say for melons, for example, anything that's a melon type of fruit, eat it alone or leave it alone, because there's a different type of enzyme that works specifically on a melon than would do dairy or other things or grain, right? So when we start discussing what is healthful for a healthy being, you have to consider again seasonality, food combining, then the average outlook. If someone has an average outlook, like it's more beneficial to indirectly be vegetarian, that doesn't mean dogmatic, like I don't eat meat and get that away from me. I'll never eat a chicken nugget or something, right? That's not the point. The point is the general outlook to promote a body that is ultimately in a healthy condition would require food that promotes that, and that of course goes again to the understanding of what the human body is and how it works. In essence, we've indirectly touched on that, on how nothing is absorbed by the body. You're not a filter bag that's under pressure, right? That's what they're trying to tell everyone for the past half century. And in essence, it's a very broad subject, but for food, again, throughout this whole Sonic, however long it is, I'll have to keep repeating that mindset is very important, and indirectly being vegetarian. We and also having knowing how to treat water, having clean, clear, cool water. Also, another thing is hygiene, proper hygiene. You know, wash your groin and your armpits often, and wash. Basically that is and underneath your fingernails. That promotes health. By the way, it promotes a healthy condition. For example, I know we're talking about food, but for hygiene is also very important as well. If you want to understand hygiene, get a 100-year-old or more nurse's manual. They don't do this anymore in current nursing manuals, but if you have an old nursing manual, especially from turn of the century or before, when a patient came in to a clinic, they made sure that underneath their fingernails were trimmed and their hair was trimmed, right? Because of just stuff. And washing their armpits and groins. I mean, that's not really in the purview anymore. Now they just spray antibacterial on you. So, when we keep bringing up health and food, there's more to that. Again, it's the actual hygiene and the mental state that is required. Like I said earlier, someone that's really happy and blissful eating junk food will always be better off than someone who's miserable and eating health food. I give an example. Years ago, I remember someone came to me and bought a very expensive bicycle because they had stage 3 cancer and they were going to die, and they wanted to, on their bucket list, ride across the United States of America with a bike, and they didn't care if they died trying. That's what they wanted to do. Well, I saw the person about 8 months later. They were real slim and looked real fit. Almost didn't recognize them. I said, "Man, I don't have cancer anymore. I rode my bike across the country. I ate hot dogs and pizza, and I have no more cancer." So you see my point? I mean, it's a very touchy subject. Uh, what I do like to discuss is how to improve the quality of people's intake. Because everyone eats, just like everyone poops. You remember there was a little children's book, Everyone Poops? No. Anyway.
No, I missed that one.
Yeah, it was a little like for 4-year-olds, and it has a little dinosaur on the cover. Yeah, you know. Anyway, so everyone eats, and, I would suggest that because you're going to eat anyway, why not listen to a sonic that is rational? If you want to listen to the terrorists, the scientists or whatever, the government agencies, the scientists, the universities, fine. That's, it's voluntary, right? Or you can listen to sound information that has been stored in front of everyone for a very, very long time, simply by the way things are done. So, and by the way, I have no qualms in calling the establishment terrorists because that's what they're doing. They're inflicting fear and chaos and actually hurting people for political reasons. The definition of a terrorist is someone who does something for political and economic or social reasons. And if you don't understand the medical and food community, the established medical food community, as being terrorists, you don't know the definition of the word terrorist. So I have no problem of using that term accurately that way. So you're going to eat anyway. So might as well discuss things that you see. If you, one of the fastest, most rapid improvements you can do to your life is changing what you eat qualitatively, because you're going to be eating anyway.
I hear you. I just want to dwell a little bit on something that you've mentioned, I think twice thus far. So, this idea of people who like it's better to be happy and eat junk food than to be overly serious and sober and say that you're going to pursue some kind of a what you perceive as a healthful diet. It may not necessarily be what you think you need. Because there's this trend over the past 10 years or so of turning everything from food to exercise to religion into some kind of lifestyle branding that's suitable for social media because that's how people manage their public image. So for those people, eating food that looks good on camera can be more important than the food's nutritional value. So one of the things you said before was how many people do you know that are super concerned about their health and diet and yet they're doing worse than people who barely care at all? And so I was wondering if maybe you could share another anecdote about that because it's interesting how one person suffers although he's making all this effort and then another person gets by hardly making any effort.
Well, the like I said earlier, maybe better than a 50-50 split. One's mental condition is important, right? I mean, think about a healthful person. Let's say you consider yourself healthy, and you ready to sit down for a meal, and the phone rings, and you get some really bad news. Very rarely do people of a sane mind will continue. Very often they will say, "I just got some bad news, and I've lost my appetite." Right?
Oh yes, that is true.
Right.
Hmm.
That's why I said it's probably better than 50-50, the mental state of an individual. Then there's the personal tolerance that some people have in reproducing the toxins. Like, for example, have you ever heard like someone saying that person, that little girl there, meaning a young lady, would drink this big guy under the table, right? You've heard many times you've heard something like that. Like someone can drink you under the table, it means they could handle more alcohol than you. It's not because they're drinking the alcohol and it's being absorbed into your blood, and the police put the monitor on you to see how much blood content you have in your blood. It's absurd that if blood was alcohol was absorbed into your blood through the intestines, you would die from sepsis, septic shock. It doesn't happen. The body actually produces that substance. Um, and the person who can drink the other person under the table is not reproducing that alcohol in the bloodstream as quickly as the other, right? Where someone who's very light on their drinking or feet, let's say, can have a little bit of some alcohol, whether it's hard liquor, beer, or wine, and feel really tipsy. It's because their body has a propensity to produce that substance. So the same goes with someone, let's say, who's eating toxified food. If you're wondering if you're eating toxified food, if you're eating food that comes in a very colorful package, it most likely is toxic, and their body may not recognize the toxins in the food and reproduce it. And where someone's body who can recognize the toxins and reproduce them will be more at detriment. You see?
Yeah, I follow you.
Yeah. This is a science. This is all based on reality. Well, science, real science, where it's not just material based, it's energetically and ethereal based as well. You see, the material, even though this is a materially based world, right? They want material. Everything is material or chemistry. It's ironic how, in many cases, even when you do produce evidence in material form, it's ignored. So that tells you they're hypocrites and they're to be abandoned. In other words, it's like it's kind of hard. It's probably harder to tell someone to abandon the society they live in mentally than to abandon their family. You always hear about people abandoning their family, whatever, and no, and they try to start a new life. Well, try to do that with the society you live in. It's even more difficult, but that is part of the necessity if you're living in a sick society or a society of such hypocrisy and evil.
Mm. As far as this idea of things being different from what you might think with regards to food, there's another thing that I've noticed, and perhaps it's a bit tangential, but there's this thing in professional sports at the moment where TV pundits will remark on how improved training and conditioning has become, and yet pro athletes suffer more than twice as many injuries now as 30 years ago, which is ironic. Like, you didn't see this many injuries in the NBA when Michael Jordan played basketball, even though the level of training facilities and medicine was considered to be lower back then. So to connect that kind of idea to food, why is it that for all the alleged upswing in gymming and fitness and dieting and variety of foods and medicines and blah blah, people today look less fit than in ancient times, and that for all the healthcare options available, there seems to be a wider variety of ailments affecting people now than before?
Because they're morons. Look at we talked about sports athletes. Let's go to another type of livestock. We could look at racehorses. They suffer the same. I would invite anyone to consider looking at racehorse statistics from 70 or 80 years ago, track times and things like that, and look at supposedly, if you're so advanced, look at the track times that horses race in today. They're much slower, and also they're more susceptible to injuries. And again, racehorses or human athletes, just another livestock again. Again, you're being led by basically pretty bad, let's say, you have the, how do you say, maybe I try to hint this in every sonic that the earth and all societies on earth are being guided by very malevolent as let's say entities. If you want to consider them being human or not human, that's up to you, but nothing good will come out of it. That's basically it. So what are you going to do about it is make a qualitative change. I would suggest that I've always made a suggestions to people who were in reasonable health to go to a sports doctor, by the way, than a regular practitioner who's used to looking at really old people and sedentary people, right? Because, for example, if you have someone who's considered fit as an athlete, go to a regular medical practitioner, they'll always say they're great, right? Because they're always looking at people that should have died 10 years ago that are being pumped up with pharmaceuticals. So you always want to go to a sports doctor because they'll tend to look at better specimens, but even they have befallen the idiocy. There's a film called Idiocracy. I think it starts off with the top research is a penis enlargement and hair growth or something like that. So yeah, they're pretty much morons. I have enough firsthand experience with top level surgeons, doctors, practitioners to tell you that they're all morons. And I'm sorry if any of you guys are listening that, I'm not pointing you out by name, but you've admitted to me that what you're doing is stupid anyway. So, yeah. Basically, the thing is that I get from most of the people that I've spoken with that are surgeons and whatever, they say, well, if someone's in a truck accident, they're going to need me. That's the best they can do. But in terms of understanding, see, you don't have to understand. Like, for example, you can go to what is it, Foxconn that makes the iPhones, and you'll see hundreds of people putting the iPhones together. And I assure you, no one putting those phones together knows how to put how an iPhone is engineered. None of them do, right? Basically, when you go into a doctor, it's an assembly line process. And how do I know that? Well, you have an eye doctor, an ear doctor, a foot doctor, a hand doctor, a skin doctor, heart doctor, right? So it's
Hmm.
on assembly line. They don't know the whole. They're not supposed to see the whole thing together. And again, I've never spoken to a researcher. in biology or surgeon or doctor that knows how the body works and can explain it at all accurately. And they think they do, and they get upset when you show them, for example, a cross section of the intestines and the lumina, and all, and say, show me how anything gets absorbed. What is the mechanism of absorption? They can't, right? My favorite is neurosurgeons. When you show them a bundle of the human nerves anatomically, and then you show them a bundle of fiber optic cable, and they're exactly the same. That's the best for shutting up the neurosurgeons. So have you ever heard of people having light, love and light and the internal light and all that? Yeah, well, it's pretty literal, believe it or not. And how many times have you seen an animation of neurons on the movies or TV or a video, and they always show you the neuron in action? What do they show you accommodating the image? Flash of light, don't they? It's right in front of you the whole time.
I once came across some information that talked about how the modern idea of a balanced diet and food groups and the food pyramid and these kind of things were introduced or at least emphasized in the 70s, and that they were pretty much arbitrary or a product of that time, but they've persisted to this day. And I think you've talked about that on other streams prior. So, as far as food or diet categorizations go, how useful have you found those things to be? And is there any such thing as what they're calling a balanced diet?
Okay, let me just give an analogy, and I'll answer that indirectly. If we were to open a cattle ranch with 300 million cattle on it, and we had a corporate meeting about running this ranch, because remember, it's 300 million cattle, that's a lot of cattle. We're going to have to produce charts and diagrams on how we're going to feed these cattle and what parameters we're going to follow, right? Remember, these are just cattle now we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, okay, that's what I have to say about that. It has nothing. Those pie charts and charts have nothing to do with people. That's for citizens and residents and whatever you want to identify with that they label that they give you to put on.
But
But
at least somebody
yeah,
would say that cattle only eat one thing and human beings kind of don't.
they're more omnivorous. But cows, they eat a lot of bugs, by the way, when they're eating that grass.
Wow,
The problem with
what variety?
well, ladybugs, hopefully, but what's going on with prionization with cattle where the idiots say, well, there's the cattle meat needs more protein for grooming and these cows for slaughter or for food, so they need more protein. So they go to a catalog and they buy protein to add to the feed, but they never kind of really consider that that protein is cow flesh protein. So now you have cows eating cows, and they get prionization in the brain, mad cow. Chickens eating chickens, Actually,
No.
chickens are one of the fowl is one of the birds are one of the interesting things. If you know anyone who's ever been in a war zone, it's not talked about much, but when they come out of the war zone, they'll and you try to serve chicken or ask about chicken, they'll say, "No, I'll never eat chicken again." Right? Because they've what do you find a lot of in a war zone typically is corpses, cadavers, bodies, human. And when you're in a war zone and you see bodies and they're not being buried, guess who else you see picking on those bodies and eating those bodies, besides dogs and things like that? Chickens. Chickens come out, get nice fat chickens out of a war zone. So they don't get prionization, but that easily. Yeah, I'm sure it is possible if they just ate chicken. But I,
Hmm.
I would say the nutritional information and all that is a joke, just like calories and everything else. I mean, I tell people I was having a discussion about food and energy and health and person wants is athletic, and I decided to get rid of them because no matter what I said, they just bounced back with the standard stock BS, academic stuff. And I said, you think the food is really giving you energy directly? And I basically wanted to get rid of them, and I started to get more on the insulting side of things. And I said, do you think those bologna and margarine sandwiches you eat every day are that was what's giving you energy? You think the Hostess Twinkie that you eat allows you to get up and walk across the room? Not at all. The food powers you indirectly, not directly. So it's kind of like engine oil in a car. If you remove from a reciprocating combustion engine the engine oil, any mechanic will tell you, well, the engine will run for a few minutes or less and burn up and blow up because it's there to cool the engine. Well, is it? No, it's there to lubricate the engine, but it's also to cool and lubricate, you see. So it's in, direct and indirect. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, if there's no oil in the engine, you will destroy the engine. If there is no food in the body, you will destroy the body eventually. But it's indirect. It has an indirect purpose.
Let's also touch real quick on this idea of organic food, because the organic food is an industry that prides itself on providing what they call a good alternative to what's being sold in the cheap end of the supermarket. But you've taken a broader view of looking at that, and you once said that organic food doesn't speak well of a society at large because it
No.
means people have allowed their regular food to become so toxified that certain corporations have to come along and offer market solutions through organic food. Is that something that you've
Right.
ever brought up to the people in the organic food world?
No, because the people in the organic food world are just as idiotic and moronic as the rest. They're just taking advantage of uh, of a market scheme or market share. For example, when I was made aware of it, it was in very, very late 70s, early 80s, of eating organically. It was never on any commercial level. Well, a very slight commercial level. It was always on the most local base, where like a farmer's market or a small health conscious store that would say that these plants and vegetables are not sprayed with insecticides and synthetic fertilizers. They wouldn't use the term organic, and because they're not sprayed with such and such, they're you won't be toxified, by eating the ones that are. So and that was still important there because there was a strong undercurrent up until the 60s and 70s that wasn't discussed much, that a lot of neurological diseases were associated with, and neuropathies were associated with what's being sprayed on plants. Like, for example, people don't know this, and you might have deniers of it. The truth is that polio that crippled, millions of people was because of the spraying of DDT, because of the flies. I mean, people are not aware of in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, there were swarms of flies through cities and suburbs. And the outcry to the municipalities was loud enough that they resorted to having spray trucks. And during the day, there'd be crowds of people. They would just start coming through spraying DDT, which was later banned. And there was even a panel of doctors that spoke at Congress. It says, "Where you guys call it polio, call it whatever you want. You're crippling your citizens." There was a book written about it by a woman who was viewed on very poorly. And to show you how evil and rotten the medical community is, they actually said, "We came up with a polio vaccine and it worked. Aren't we great?" And most of the people applauded the doctors for that. They need to make a vaccine for stupidity, so you see. But anyway, then there won't be any more doctors.
Yeah, well, there'll be a lot of classes that will disappear if that happens,
Yeah.
not just the doctors.
Yeah. You'll just have emergency medical. I mean, it's just like there's certain countries in Europe, they don't really have a standing army because every man between a certain age has to once a month go and do target practice and have an M16 or a rifle in their house to protect the country, right? In a proper society, you won't need doctors. I mean, actually, doctors have been made fun of even in the biblical times, um, basically joking around like they can't even heal themselves. You just basically have with each community a group of people that know how to address emergency situations. You don't need doctors. I mean, it's a ridiculous. It's just, yeah, it's just a sick, sick society. I mean, we're too bad we're stuck on this planet. But just like any issue, it boils down to state of mind. And that's if you manipulate, even the American presidents, when in recent wars they say we're doing this to capture the heart and mind. What was it, Citizen Kane? You get the war. You figure out where you want to go to war, and I'll make it happen. Meaning the newspaper will make it happen, right? It's a state of mind.
Indeed. Let's not forget to talk about the seasonality thing. So, as far as correlation between health and food goes, one of the most emphasized points that you've made is about how the time of year affects the conditions within the body and how food intake should be brought in alignment with that. So, I want to look at why eating seasonably is something important, and you've touched on it a bit already. How did you come to learn that this was sort of a pertinent concept, and what's the most obvious evidence that speaks in favor of that?
Well, I learned through observation from a very young age that the diet changed during when it was, let's say, warm outside, the hot seasons, late spring, summer, early fall. we ate differently than we did in midwinter. And anyone will notice that, I'll have a hot, fresh, a cool, fresh salad and some fruit in the summer, and in the winter I want a hot bowl of soup, right? Anyone will realize that that is an occurrence, a normal, natural occurrence in most societies. Uh, and then I started looking at uh, the contrast from coming from a European background to the American background that I lived in, on how crappy and tasteless the American food was. And I also noticed how consistently bad it was, because they tried to eat the same stuff all year round. Then I discovered macrobiotics, which was a short stint. It was something that was formed in the 70s through 80s, and I came in the middle of it. I actually knew some of the people that formed it in this country, um, Shizuko Yamamoto and Michio Kushi and Aveline Kushi. Herman Ihara did not know, and George Osawa had died before. But I was around those people, and a lot of what they said made enough sense for me to remember the aspect, not to be so Nippo-centric, meaning Japanese-centric, but taking with me the idea that it's seasonal affects the body. And also there is a blood chemistry that's involved, and it's provable that in colder climates, the blood tends to be a little thicker. Not that the blood is the be-all, end-all, but the blood is a little thicker than in warmer climates, right? Like, for example, in a cold climate, you get a hot fever, and in a hot climate, you get a cold fever. So there's a reversal, right? So there is a difference there. So the cross-seasonal chemical aspect or influence would be, for example, if you're living in a cold climate and you eat something grown in the tropics, that food will tend to adjust the body to a tropical condition, and you will feel uncomfortable and you will not be able to warm yourself. Where if you're in a hot climate and you eat food that's grown in a cold climate, it will tend to acclimate your body to a colder climate and you won't be able to cool down. Another analogy would be, if you're up near the North Pole or the South Pole and you eat a banana, you won't be able to stay warm. And if you're living near the equator or the tropics and you eat salmon fish from the Arctic, you won't be able to cool down. And I found this to be true through experimentation.
Hmm. But for somebody who wants to be a detractor of what you're talking about, they might say, well, but look at all the people who don't eat seasonally, which constitutes, I don't know, only like 80% of the world's population, and they're fine. I mean, sure, they get sick, but not outside the realm of what's reasonable. Everybody gets sick anyway, and it's not like your diet will cure contagion or cancer or even prevent headaches. So how pertinent is it really beyond being just a recommendation, beyond many other dietary recommendations?
Depends on what quality you're looking for. It's just like headphones or bicycles or cars or bed sheets. I like these bed sheets that everybody else uses. Yeah, I get a little bit of rash, but it's okay. Everybody else is using them, right? Or these headphones work. I paid $1 for them at the dollar store. They're great. They work. Everybody else buys them. They're always out of stock. I mean, it's just a qualitative issue. Now, in many cases, I have not found that people that had, let's say, advanced forms of illness do much better by eating seasonally. But I have found 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10 times, that when people do eat seasonally, they are far more comfortable during that season. I've had direct experimentation and subjective and objective experimentation done by others. What I mean by subjective and objective would be where they're actually doing a study and being strict, and subjective means, yeah, I cut out some of the things I used to eat, kind of, more loose about it. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, it's something to be considered, but it doesn't seem to be observably the be all end all because we have at the end of the day adjusted to, or people have largely adjusted to a world where they completely don't eat seasonally, and there's not dropping as flies in any case.
No, but it's a cumulative thing. Like for example, with race cars, I remember some people buying the Porsche 911 body to race on a track. And one of the things about a race car is making it as light, the horsepower to weight ratio. You want to make it as lightweight as possible. And the way you do that is not by changing one component, making it lighter, but taking off a little bit of weight off of as many components as possible. It's done in the airplane industry. For example, years ago, I remember if it costs less than $300 to remove a pound off of an airplane part, do it, right? Because you're going to get the returns on that on the fuel. So, it's a cumulative effect. Again, better than 50-50 split. Your mindset is important. Eating seasonally is important. Seeking quality food is important if you can get it. Basically, what they call heirloom or more original type grains and vegetables, right, versus the newer ones that are being presented and faked as allergies, just like they fake a polio vaccine, right? So there are many aspects to this when you look at it cumulatively, and then the cumulative effect is the gross effect, the single effect you could look at.
Mm. Let's also look at fake food, by which I mean food that observably does the opposite of what we can all agree food is supposed to do. So, at the broadest level of analysis, we can agree that the purpose of food is to provide the body with nutritional needs and energy levels that allow it to remain vitalized and healthful. And yet, anyone who's paying attention will have noticed how certain foods, particularly fast foods, leave you feeling less vitalized or sometimes even groggy or sleepy. And maybe if you're not a child, I noticed that children seem to be able to eat a lot of that stuff and it doesn't seem to visibly affect them. But for me, it became noticeable as an adult when I stopped eating fast food for a few months and then came back to it that it had an adverse effect. What can be said about that type of thing where processed foods seem to not really help you with vitality and health?
Well, it's the intent behind it and the actual quality of the food. Again, like for example, certain types of cheeses are processed food. I mean, how do you make cheese, right? And it can be beneficial. I mean, for example, if you're doing a vegetarian diet and you look at something like tempeh, which is a fermented soybean bean, or miso, which is a fermented bean paste. Those are processed. They're crushed, filtered, salted, cured. It's the matter of quality again. I mean, is there such thing as a quality fast food? Of course there is. Have you ever heard of like a bean burrito? That's quality. I mean, that's fast food, and if it's a quality flour tortilla and quality beans, it's good. But again, I think we go back. If we go back to the earlier intent of the major corporations, which are the government, by the way, there is no government, there is no corporation. It's just this big amalgamation. It's hard to discern. But for typical discussion, you would say that their intent is evil. But real evil is always presented as good, right? And whenever you bring up fast food, or because fast food, by the way, is not just for convenience. It's also a subculture, right? I mean, for many people, I know, for example, in the ghetto, it's prestigious to eat McDonald's. I remember in the 80s and 90s, if you lived in the ghetto and you ate at McDonald's, you were living large, right? So, uh, I mean, it's more than just calling when you say fast food. I'm not sure if it can be defined outside of the negativity that's been acquired by the term through the corporate industrial malintent aspect of it. Because I eat fast food very often. Like if I want fast food, I will prepare something that is easy to prepare and take it with me if I'm traveling. But it's not the fast food. When we say fast food as a genre of food, which is basically industrial malintent. I think it goes beyond just profit. I think it's everything is becoming a religion, right? Or there's a spiritual aspect to it. What I mean by that, again, like I started off earlier, the people that are what are generally referred to as Satanists, they are interested in controlling the political scene, which they do the food and the water. I mean, that's a fact. If anyone has done research on that, and I'm talking beyond the satanic panic from the 80s and 90s, which is covered up. But if you were to, these are malevolent people with malevolent intent, you'll find that they're very much into the genre of fast food. Like I don't know if anyone remembers, a couple of years ago there was a radical rabbi that said they had some McDonald's beef patties tasted and there was evidence of human flesh in them, right? And most people would laugh at that. Some people say that sounds kind of scary, but I'll tell you, if even a rumor of that would ring more true, not because it happened by accident, but because it's actually part of their religion. You see, they're part what they believe in. You know what I mean?
What are some of the more significant industrial developments that come to mind for you in terms of the degradation of food quality? Because a lot is said about the Monsantos and the Bayers of the world, but whether we talk about factory farming or spraying of pesticides or the prevalence of food labs or the rise of tin food, etc., is there anything that you would put your finger on that has contributed the most to today's state of food?
No, it's cumulative. It's you ever heard of the term? It's what's in the water, and it's true that people who don't have municipal water that rely on a spring are more intelligent. Their IQs are higher. If you're going to use that as a measurement, it's water, it's air, it's food, it's mindset, it's education, right? It's all of it. It's the packaging. Believe it or not, you can take good food and wrap it in packaging that has fungicides on it, because if you're adding the chemical to the packaging, it's not a food ingredient, it's a packaging ingredient, and there's no criteria for listing what's added to the packaging. I remember once going to a convention, and I asked someone, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, you wouldn't know." I said, "Why?" He says, "Because I'm in food chemicals and packaging chemicals." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I make preservatives that we add to, food packaging." Well, really? He says, "Yeah, we have fungicides, bactericides, and things like that. Yeah, and they add it to the package, not to the food, so it doesn't have to be labeled." I mean, that goes beyond food, but it has a detrimental effect as well.
That's very interesting. I never really given that much thought. That's worth looking into.
Yeah, there's very little information on it, but there's enough information that's with facts in hand that you could see it's indisputable.
Mm. Another thing to that I want to look at is this idea of taste, and perhaps it's a bit tangential, but I think it's distantly related to this whole conversation about food. I was reading something by George Orwell a few months ago, and he said something interesting about food because he doesn't usually talk about it, as far as I know. But he said, in the highly mechanical countries, that is the Western world, thanks to tin food and cold storage and synthetic flavoring, the palate is almost a dead organ. As you can see by looking at any greengrocer's shop, what the majority of English people mean by an apple is a lump of highly colored cotton wool from America. They will devour these things with pleasure and let the English apples rot under the trees. It's the standardized, machine-made look of the American apple that appeals to them, and the superior taste of English apples is something that they don't notice. So when I read that, it made me think about something that you once said that I don't remember the quote exactly, but essentially you were saying that what people describe as the taste of their food, they don't use the proper adjectives for that. They just say, "Oh, well, this tastes good" or "this tastes bad." And meanwhile, good and bad are not indicators of taste or flavor adjectives, they're moral adjectives. And so the language to even describe taste doesn't really exist in people's vocabulary. And one quote that I think you did say was that some people can't taste their food very well because they don't want to. They're already attached to their established palate and they can't move away from it. And so all food is either good or bad to them because they haven't developed a sense of nuance in their taste. Can you elaborate on that a bit more and how, those sensibilities are missing from people's awareness and what contributes to that?
Sure, there's a level of conditioning and there's a level of, let's say, categorization that I like to use, and then we'll try to bring the conditioning part in as well. I typically categorize people as either having a good palate, and that means they have a good sense of smell and taste, and that means they have a high potential of producing very tasty food or good food preparation if they were to be employed as a chef, for example, or the one who does the cooking. Then I have the one that I call a juvenile palate, which tends to prefer foods and tastes that young children do. And then I have one category that I consider to be the corrupted palate, which is either from it's so desensitized physically by eating poor food, then might as well turn it off. Just like someone, like if you saw someone cut in half and thrown into the street, you would probably feel sick. Where a seasoned paramedic who's desensitized to that, an emergency technician would just say, let's hurry up and clean this guy because I want to finish eating the sandwich I have in the car, right? So it's a matter of conditioning that way, and from eating bad food from what I call standard American diet or standard white people food, like Northern Europe as well. Um, and there are places on the continent of Africa too that have a ghastly diet. But generally, most people will be aware of the white people food or American diet as being very poor. But I would also suggest that the corrupted palate is from eating just overly flavored, like you mentioned, the synthetic flavors added to food. Like, for example, someone who's, let's say, likes to drink strong alcohol won't find a beer as being accommodating. It'll be like water to them because they're used to a stronger brand, a stronger type. So that's another way of corrupting it. Certain drugs, for example, a tolerance to synthetic additives and natural additives. Like, for example, I'll just throw this in as a natural additive. If you take celery juice, if you juice celery, that has like in Japanese, they would call it oshi umami, which means delicious flavor when you add it to things that are savory. So, for example, if you had a menu that you cooked at home, general variety of food, savory dishes, and you added celery juice to all those dishes, whether it was a pasta or rice, a stew, a savory meal, anything, and you consistently added celery juice to it for a few weeks or months, and then you stopped adding the celery juice as an ingredient in most of the savory dishes, you would find them to be very bland and almost not tasteful because you got used to that extra, very flavor enhancing celery juice. You see, one aspect of that is, again, typical Americans that don't cook and buy a lot of prepared foods. There are things called modified food starch, modified corn starch, natural flavors, or MSG, are all the same, usually flavor enhancers, and they don't find food that has that lacks that ingredient as being tasty. For example, I had years ago, I had a client, pretty wealthy client, who went on a vacation to Rome and various parts of Italy and Spain, and they didn't slum it. They actually went to the better end of travel, and they said that the food there was terrible. I was like, are this is a typical American palate, that he had. And of course it would be because he was used to this corrupted, Stouffer's and McDonald's and Chick-fil-A sandwiches, and his wife microwaving preheated, pre-cooked meals and things like that. These are wealthy people too. And he went to places like Rome and Spain and Barcelona and places that had some of the best food cultures and to best tasting food in the world and found it to be distasteful. You see how subjective it can be. So, and it's not like this person didn't have access to food. I'll give you an example. I'm not giving their identity too much, but this person's family was, you could trace it back to the Costanoga wagon. They came here building most of the wagons that were used to settle the country. And they still had they were pretty wealthy. So old money, and they didn't know how to eat, and they were fully corrupted. So again, I think your social status hasn't much to do as culture and tradition in this case.
Mm. Well, I think we would be remiss to talk about food and taste and things of this nature and not mention something about one of the most common sources of people's food, which is restaurants, because they don't want to cook it themselves. They want to go out and let somebody else cook it for them, especially if they have money. So I want to pick your brain as someone who has some know-how about that sphere. What kind of trivia can you share about how the restaurant business sources its ingredients or compiles its menus or anything that would enlighten someone as to what it is that they're eating at their average restaurant?
Ooh, restaurants. Okay, from a decency point of view, a good food experience is always gotten from what I would call a supper club, not a restaurant. Most restaurants will, no matter how much good intent they have, they will fail to make a profit if they seek out only quality. And do exist, and that's why when you do see, haute cuisine restaurants, they only stay in business for a few years, and it's intended to do that because it's not necessarily a money-making scheme. But supper clubs are different. It's a whole different genre, less public, more specialized, But I would suggest that for restaurant eating, the rule of thumb is clean kitchen is better food. If a restaurant is not clean, and I don't mean an obvious cleanliness, that as well, but there's also a deep cleanliness. Like look up at the ceiling. If there's dust by the vents or the lighting, look at the corners of things. If it's not really clean, it's not going to taste as good as it could. Also, if you're going to a restaurant, know their kitchen. If you can't see the kitchen, and you ask to see the kitchen, they almost take that as an insult and typically refuse. I like to put on the retard move, like I do. Like if they have the kitchen closed and I want to go in there, I'll just I target what I think is the kitchen and I just barge in and I keep walking and I look around and they say, "Hey, what are you doing here? Get out of here!" And I just turn around and say, "Oh, I'm looking for the bathroom. Is it the bathroom?" Or something like that, right? Yeah, say, I thought this was the bed, right? I thought this was the bathroom, right? Oh no, get out of here. The bathroom's the other way. Of course I knew, but I just wanted to see it. Then I'll go back to my seat and say, honey, let's get out of here, right? Another thing is when a waiter or waitress brings you a menu, and before you act like you're looking at the menu, and you look at the wait person and say, "What's good here? What do you eat?" And believe it or not, more than once I've had the waiter or the waitress say to me, "Eat here? No, I would never eat here." Right? Meaning the waitress. You're like, okay, thanks very much. Bye bye. You know, and I might even leave $1 or two as a tip because that's actually worth their service. They actually provided you a service by the waiter or waitress telling you that I don't eat here. Right? I mean that they deserve a tip just for that and just walk out. You see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are some basic tips. There's also a lot of masquerading of an open kitchen being a benefit. Yes, there are some places, many places, more than not, by the way, new establishments that are kind of more of a casual, but yet tend to be higher quality, have open kitchens, right? And that's good also. But also, you still look at the floor. Is it clean? Right? Look at what there's an Asian. I'm not going to mention the name, but there's an Asian fast food place. I have discovered some good Asian restaurants again here. Not. I mean, there are a lot of Asian restaurants where you bring your own cat and you get a free egg roll, right? And don't laugh at that because there are some Asian restaurants that are hardcore Asian restaurants that do have cat on the menu on the Chinese menu. And unless you know what cat tastes like and you happen to get that, you won't know. You'll just say this is something very gamey. But I've had experience with someone who was an anthropologist who traveled the world and once did bust a restaurant here in town by serving cat, and they did. He called the authorities on it, by the way, on them. Anyway, uh, so uh, uh, there's an Asian restaurant that has an open kitchen, fast food. You can guess who they are. I mean, they have a logo which is an animal, but anyway. Uh, they have an open right. You could see where they're doing all the food prep, but when they have certain ingredients, it's just this big frozen slab, of material, So you could see that it's sourced from a, not such a good quality, but at least it's an open kitchen, right? So I mean, I remember once, barging into a kitchen that I wanted to eat at a certain place, or I was traveling, barged into the kitchen like that, like, "I'm looking in the bathroom," kind of thing. And they yelled at me, and I looked on the floor, and they had cooking pots with mops in them. You know what I mean? And I was like, "Oh, we're out of here."
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. You got to have fun. I mean, here's the thing: history, the current society, any society that you look at right now, is not going to be on the good side of history. In the future. So you can you just don't get yourself in trouble, publicly, with making demands or too many crazy comments. But I will speak. If you want to know what I'm thinking, just listening to what I'm saying, and you're probably thinking the same once you're made aware of it. Yeah, it's so.
I do want to stay on this thing a little bit more because it certainly is funny, but there's a serious aspect to it. I mean, you once gave an analogy that was connected to something other than food. I don't remember what it was, but I think you were talking about inefficiency within industries and or efficiency or how to be efficient. And when you mentioned the thing about rats in the hot dog factory, so basically, one would think that health and sanitation regulations would forbid food factory owners from allowing rats to fester in their factories, but in fact, this is actually such a challenging task that it would effectively halt the production of certain foods if the regulatory bodies were insistent to follow the rules. So, in order to allow for the business to continue, a minimum amount of, unhygienic things like rats are allowed to exist in the, for example, hot dog factory, although it's presented to the public that this is, not the case.
Well, there's a tolerance for rat fecal matter in the hot dogs, for example.
Oh, right, that.
Right, and initially it was never really zero. As the testing got more stringent and more quote unquote clinical, they found that all hot dog sup, whatever suppliers had fecal matter in their food, and they couldn't shut them all down. So then they just noticed that we'll just raise the acceptable limit. So what we do find in it is still acceptable, right?
Right. So I wanted to pivot from that into the subject of unsanitary kitchen conditions that you may be aware of are tolerated in the restaurant business. Because I've seen many a rat in restaurant kitchens, and everybody knows it in the kitchen, and it's just known, but the guests wouldn't guess it.
Yeah. Well, you live in a society. Let's just divert from the topic a little bit. You notice that there's been certain agendas regarding people's gender and sexuality and gender fluidity and all that. That's been politicized, and if you oppose it, it's a crime, right? You've noticed that it's been happening in the past decade. Let me just put it this way: what's in the works right now is it's already finished. It just hasn't been implemented. Is the promotion and adherence to cannibalism. So if you're going to be served fellow, let's say, humans that are processed in your food knowingly, and you can't say anything negative about it, how bad is rat material?
It's pretty benign.
Yeah. So just get ready. That's the next one of the next few things that's coming. Yeah. So it's already done. The whole thing is put together, and you've been actually aborted fetuses and other things like that are in the food chain already, and in the drug chain. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the more disconcerting things that I found, and perhaps you mentioned it at some point, was the prevalence of human hair in the bread. I think they use it as some kind of a binder,
Dough
according from,
conditioner.
yeah.
Yeah. There's a protein, I think it's lysine or something. It's correct. I don't want to say. I'm not sure what it's. I think it's used as a dough conditioner. Yeah, and because of the in China, there's grooming codes. The fact when you work in a factory in a lot of the mainland Chinese government big corporate factories, you dorm there, you sleep there, you eat there, you work. Basically it's like going to the military. You work at the factory, and you might take off a few days or a week, a year to go back to the town where you came from, but you spend all your time there, and they have grooming regulations, and they just like Google, where you go, you work at Google, you get your laundry done, your haircut, yeah. Well, you work in a Chinese factory, they cut your hair frequently, and that basically by the end of the week you have billions of pounds of hair. You could process it into dough conditioner for all your big takeout pizza corporate pizzas. They have the laboratory. The food is designed it's called a food lab, and they say we need dough conditioner. Well, who's got the best price on it, right? That's how it gets into the food chain.
Yeah, anytime I go to a supermarket now and I see bread for under $1, I'm like, nope, we're not getting that.
Unknown. It has to be studied, to a degree, but I'll tell you, if you have a hearth, an oven, or something, or even a pan, you can make your own flatbread, very easily. It takes literally, once the dough is prepared in a few minutes, less than a minute to make. And it's delicious.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good segue into the last thing that we'll look at, which is food preparation. And I mean, I think you once said something interesting about how people view cooking food. You said people act like cooking meat kills the bacteria that might be present in it, but if there's that much bacteria in it, why are you eating it in the first place? If you think the meat is tainted and that cooking will prevent foodborne illness, it's already questionable in quality. It's not even like you got rid of the bacteria, it's just cooked bacteria now.
It's not bad bacteria. Your body is 90% bacteria anyway. What do you think cells are? It's about, is the animal diseased or not? It's called a downer. A downer, like there are a lot of downer animals. And I think up until about 7 or 8 years ago, most government regulations told food, agricultural people, if you have a downer animal, you can't put it in the food chain. Not anymore. Now downers are allowed into the food chain, disease, because they're all diseased anyway. There's a big concern, for example, with salmonella in eggs and chicken. That's a disease. You can't cook it out. There's a lady I wanted to give props to. I don't, she's about 50% there, which is a lot to say. Her name is Dr. Lorraine Day, and you just go into. She has a couple of YouTube interviews. She's fascinating. She doesn't know. She's somewhat censored, but she's had tremendous success. Look at her recent photos. She's 82, and she looks like a well-kept 55-year-old. And she ended up using juicing and distilled water and a few other practices to beat stage 4 cancer. And anyone can, if you do what she says, her regimen, to a degree. Uh, and I guess I brought her up because she has a few analogies, because like she gives one analogy with chicken. When you buy animal products now, the package says it may contain up to 10% water. Well, the chicken, when they process it at the slaughtering house, when it's initially gutted, it's dropped into a pool of water, and it's fecal water, and they let the chicken sit there for a given amount of time so the chicken carcass can absorb the water. So it's basically absorbing fecal matter water into the tissue. And so she made a comment to someone who says, well, I cook my chicken well. And she goes, well, you're just cooking your fecal matter well. It doesn't matter if you cook the fecal matter well, it's still eating fecal matter, right? You want raw fecal matter or cooked fecal matter? How good does that sound, right?
Yeah, I
Do
guess.
you want to eat diseased animals raw, or you want to eat them well done? What's the difference? And adrenaline cannot be cooked out of meat, by the way. If anyone wants to look up at what temperature the adrenaline hormone and enzymes break down, it's 3 or 4 times beyond what well done is. It's in the hundreds of degrees, right? It's amazing how this is all by design. Is almost, when you start to get a society forming with evil premises, it's very easy to turn their natural surroundings as weapons against them. It's such a fine, delicate balance. You have to love the perfection of it. You want to be evil, the thing that you normally do now will be your evil will be what would you call payback on you.
Mm. I mean, it's unfortunate that that goes beyond so many people's purview, but I think, yeah, if you pay attention to things, you have to ask yourself those questions, why certain malevolent things are so prominent.
Right, it's no secret. Anyone has access to what we're talking about in terms of the dark side. It's not that you need to be a vehement student of it, but be aware of it, and as your curiosity leads you, I think just avoiding it completely. As some people might say, well, my spirit, my brain doesn't need to know any of that. Well, that's fine, but I'll notice most of the time those people fall, forward into many of the agendas, thinking that they're good.
Hmm. Okay, we're an hour and a half in, so we'll just wrap up with I got three types of food that I'm just gonna throw at you, and maybe you can give me some recommendations for how to do them well, cook them well, prepare them well, based on your experience. So let's start with salad. I know it's very generic, but give it your best shot.
Oh, a salad is a very general thing. I would say instead of saying salad, I would suggest vegetable, leafy green, right? There's a fruit salad also. Most people would, in the West, consider a salad to be, a leafy green with seasonal vegetable. There's something also called a slaw or a pressed salad, which I would like to make people more aware of. Like something called cuniferous vegetables, or things like kale and collard and Swiss chard, which tend to be more hearty, which are more associated with, a savory pot dish, cooking it, in a pot. I would suggest like cabbage coleslaw, right? Cabbage is a very hearty leaf, and it's sliced real thin and mixed with a dressing, right? A pressed salad is very similar to that. If you could remove the stem material, even with cabbage, if you remove the stem material, it makes it more pleasant to eat. But you would cut the hearty vegetable or the hearty leafy green and add a dressing to it. It could be an acid, citrus. I've been using citrus more than vinegars lately, for the acidity aspect, than using olive oil and both raw sesame oil and toasted sesame oil as the oils, and mixing it all together, and then actually putting weight on it. So if you have it in a bowl, you find a small plate that's correspondingly smaller than the edge of the bowl. That would, if you were to put a weight on it, a jar with water, let's say, or a lead weight, or another small pot to weigh down the salad, actually press on it. It's a form of cooking the vegetable, right? It's a pressed salad. Yeah, have you ever seen like wilted lettuce? If you take lettuce and you kind of work it in your hands and wilt it and mush it up, it's very soft. And it's sometimes not pleasing for a lettuce, but for a hearty green vegetable like a kale, a collard, or a Swiss chard, I would recommend or cabbage, make a pressed salad, and it's breaks down without using heat. And it's actually far more nutritious than, a wimpy lettuce, let's say. That's what I have to say about salads. And in terms of fruit salads, when it's melon, eat it alone or leave it alone. If you ever see I would suggest for many people, whoever has heard me say that and has followed that says, yes, I always feel better by not eating melon with other things as they're presented fashionably and many times. So that's what I have to say about salads.
Okay. Pizza.
Pizza is the most popular food in the world, believe it or not, supposedly, according to the media that I watch occasionally. And I think Norway eats more pizza than anyone else in the world. So, or per capita, or is the number one food there. What is it? Well, it's a flatbread essentially, or semi-flatbread. Some styles are very heavy, very easy to prepare is the idea, and it's savory. Of course, there are toppings. Personally, I'm not into toppings. I think that if you have a high quality, what's called crust or dough, assembled with a high quality sauce, and cheese or no cheese is enough. The more basic, the better. If you want to get into making pizzas, I think there was another chat, a chat that I used to, the new Greekspeek. I think I haven't frequented that in a while. I've kind of tried to stay out of public eye. Other than this, I think I've posted photos of pizzas that I've made in a hurry, and they would rival anything you could buy at a store. So what I would suggest about pizza, besides being popular and having if you like to eat that sort of thing, learn how to make it yourself.
Indeed, but that's where we want the tips, Greek. Like, why are you saying that you wouldn't have ingredients? That flies in the face of convention completely. At least, I want to respect that convention. We want
Oh,
ingredients on the pizzas.
ingredients on the pizza. Well, there's many. Like I said, if you're going to go, let's say, quote unquote, on the vegan side, let's work it backwards. You don't have to have cheese on pizza. And you don't even have to have sauce on pizza. So what are we talking about? Basically, you're making a low rise or flatbread with some kind of savory topping or sauce on it. That's basically it. As a matter of fact, some of the more elaborate exotic pizzas don't even have sauce or cheese, or it might just be cheese or just sauce, right? There's a high-end pizza place that opened here, and the pizza is just bread and sauce. There's no cheese. His cheese costs extra. I was like, what the hell is that? Well, because they're striving to do the best quality dough, the best quality sauce. Well, what do you know about making dough or bread? Right. Well, one thing you might learn is when you make a loaf of bread, with that high rise, it's leavened, takes a long time to rise it, and it's very tall. It takes a lot of heat, long time to cook, right? Relative to a low rise dough, which is relatively low, it takes less heat and less energy. Another thing about making pizza is you can make pizza in a pan. If you have a low rise dough, something yeasted or not, you can spread it out and put it on a pan and flip it over. So it cooks on both sides. And have your toppings immediately ready. So when you flip it, that is still hot, and put your toppings on that and then cover it so steam, or put it under a broiler. I mean, there's so many different ways. I would suggest if you want to learn how to make quick pizzas, there's something called a Greek pita. Literally, it's labeled Greek pita. It's like a pita pocket without the pocket. It's kind of more of a spongy, low-rise dough. They're commercially available. Get that. If you have a toaster oven or an oven or a pan, get that hot with some sauce on it. You can buy a pasta sauce or tomato sauce. And the best way to make a sauce, by the way, is not just with tomatoes, but adding some tomato paste to it. It takes the acidity away. And also, cooked onion takes acidity away, and a pinch of sugar takes acidity away. And then a cheese product, or if you don't want to use a cheese product, use a vegetable product on top, or put as much of it as you want. So the simple Greek pita will make a quick pita. As a matter of fact, I make those here at home. And very often I'd go out and get a pizza, and I'd be told, the pita pizzas that I make here are better than the pizza than you buy at the pizza place. Very often. So I would suggest just learn how to make a low-rise bread, and you're not going to be successful until you are. In other words, practice, practice, practice on it.
Mm. All right, steak or beef. I'll just say beef slash steak.
Muscle, right? Yeah, muscle, beef muscle or bovine muscle. Let's be real, right? That's what it is, right? Well, if you're going to eat bovine muscle, what I suggest many times is, well, of course, get the best quality you can. And if it is a very well a good quality beef steak, depending on the cut, of course. If it's a roast, it needs a lot of cooking. If it's a steak, it could be broiled or roasted. The advice that I give on cooking steaks is that, of course, it should be a high quality grass fed if you can get it, organic if you can get it. It costs 3 times as much, but you're not eating this often. You should have a low moisture content. Very often, if you buy beef muscle and you want to cook it, put it in the fridge with a paper towel, come back the next day, you notice how much water is in it again, because they're selling water is the most profitable thing, right? But if that's why if you look at the many of the prized places that serve beef, they call it aged beef, right? And what that means is literally low moisture content, and it's there are enzymes in the meat that tenderize, self-tenderizing. But what I would do is if I can purvey a good quality piece of beef, I would try to put it on a paper towel or rack in the refrigerator so it dries a little bit. You could actually see it, shrinking slightly, and then I would bring it up to room temperature and salt it and just cook it over a fire without anything else on it, and some salt, or in a pan with some fat like butter or beef fat, if it's a steak as such, right? To be eaten, because if it's good quality, you want to taste that beef, just salt and maybe some black pepper or something. Now, they're cooking beef in other ways, like in stews and pot beef. I always prefer very often using what are considered French or Vietnamese spices, meaning if I say Vietnamese style spices, that was influenced by the French, where you have anise, star anise, ground or not ground, cinnamon bark, right, ground or not ground, some cardamom, garlic, whole garlic, fennel seeds. You put that in with your liquid, and to make a roast or to cook the meat that way, it makes it very fragrant and delicious, right?
Ah, quite the enlightening exposition there. But yeah, I think we'll have to wrap up on that note. With this is, it's funny how this is the longest episode that we've done, and yet it's not something that I consider myself too versed in. But yeah, it was interesting to explore. So yeah, I think I'm good. If you have anything you want to conclude with on the topic of food, Greek, I'll let you do that.
No, that would be it. I mean, it's too big of a topic to actually cover in any amount of time. So we'll just sign off here and come up with something else for the next Sonic.
Absolutely, of course, there will be things to talk about next time we get together for one of these. But I hope that our listenership has learned something new today, and that it gives you food for thought. So thank you for tuning into this episode of Greekspeek, and we'll be back again next time.